Hello and welcome back to the final part of Pastel Masterclass 3. You can see here that I'm continuing over towards the left, just bringing the final parts of this jungle scene to a conclusion. Hopefully you're getting familiar with the process by now. One little note, you notice here I'm using this black pencil. A little note on the use of black. I know a lot of painters would say never use black, and that is a point. But when I'm using black here in this jungle scene, I'm not using the black in order to make a mark that is black. What I'm actually doing is using the black to darken the green that's already there. So although a lot of black is used, it's only used tonally. It mixes with the greens that are in there, so that there's not really any place on the painting that ends up as a solid black. I certainly wouldn't want that. So I think it's perfectly safe to use black, and certainly in order to use black. If you think of the days before digital printing, the way the litho printing process worked is they had a cyan, a magenta and a yellow layer, and then they also had a tonal layer, a black layer, and that's what brought everything tonally into the right value. And I think that way when I'm painting, actually. So I do use black, but I use it blended in with the other base colours. So what I would suggest you take away from that is, you know, occasionally, yes, you can put black into something when it's really required to be black, but most of the time use that black just to tint other colours, just to bring your tonal value down to where you want it to be. Now, having established those tonal ranges and values down at the bottom of that section, I just turn my attention up to the top of the canopy here and seek to set that back a little bit using those atmospheric blues, skimming them here and there. I want plenty of air in between the forward bushes and these much more distant ones. There's really nothing more than the weight of the pencil being applied to the surface here, and when you apply pastel so lightly and so gently, notice how you can do it in a way that doesn't disturb any of your details that you've got underneath. This glazing technique, I do it a lot, and it doesn't matter how much detail is there underneath, you can still manage to tweak those colours if you're gentle enough without disturbing all your fine details. It's just a nice tool to have in your arsenal, isn't it, to be able to just adjust colours minutely like this. It's a very valuable thing, but it does take a very light touch. Pastels are very delicate, and notice how I'm being very careful not to smudge the painting with my hand. I work upright, and that well, it's about 45 degrees, and that really does help. But if you work flat, what you really need is a piece of glassine or greaseproof paper that you can lay on the surface of your painting, so you can rest your hand on that. Never make the mistake of putting your hand on the surface of your painting, because you could just end up rubbing it all out or making a a real muddy mess of everything. So you do have to be careful with that. I'm used to doing it, so it's sort of second nature, so I don't really think about it. But as I watch over this clip, I am aware of how careful I'm being not to disturb the surface with the palm of my hand. You may have noticed earlier that I was using a painter's marl stick as well. I use that a lot actually, just resting on the top edge of the easel, and then you can rest your hand on that. You can use that upright or flat. I've had the same marl stick for 30 years and yeah, I love it. This part of the jungle here at the top where it meets the cliff is actually the furthest away in the entire painting, so that's why it was getting a little bit more of that atmospheric attention. The blue that I was putting on at first wasn't quite throwing it back enough, that's why I added some of that very pale grey as well. And then I'm just bringing up some of the highlights on the leaves just to finish it off here. It's that balancing act that I do, balancing everything, tonally, colour wise, just bringing it all up or down to the exact level that I want it to be. There are many surfaces available on the market for pastel painting, but my favourite absolutely is the Clairefontaine Pastelmat. The reason I like it so much is that it will accept a lot of layers, and it'll also take a lot of fine detail. And once you've passed that initial layer on it, the blending becomes beautifully smooth. I think it really delivers everything that a pastel artist needs. It is for me the king of pastel surfaces. I used to work on the more sandpaper type surfaces, and they were also very good, but they couldn't take quite the amount of detailing that Clairefontaine offers. The other surfaces that have a velvet surface to them, like velour, I find personally that they're just a little bit too hard to work on. They seem to dictate how you work, whereas Pastelmat just allows you to freely express yourself, and I think that's makes it superior. You may have noticed that throughout this video I refer to my work as paintings. Even though they're not done with a brush, they're done with pencils and chalks. But to me they're still paintings. I think a drawing is something that's primarily concerned with rendering shape and perspective, and tone of course. Whereas a painting concerns itself with expressing light and colour. And I think if that's the primary focus of what you're doing, then what you're doing is painting, irrespective of the fact that you may be using a pencil as opposed to a brush. But at the end of the day, I suppose it doesn't really matter which side of the argument you're on. All that matters at the end of the day is that we produce something that looks beautiful. And hopefully, I've managed to achieve that here. Although I have to admit, I did have a little helper. And with that left-hand side of the painting getting completed, we can now take a look at the finished painting. I added more foliage to the very bottom part, but I did it in exactly the same way as I'd shown you with the other leaves, so it would be just repetition to have shown those as well. The overall effect, I think, was pleasing to the eye. That was the main thing. I wanted to get the feeling of that light and atmosphere, and the bird on the left just swooping away, whilst the main focus on the right hand side of the painting was lifting his head up proudly to the sky, raising his head to greet that beautiful morning in Thailand, that early morning sunlight as it rose up from behind those cliffs that I had so much enjoyed when I stood there and took it in real life. And I hope that I've managed to capture some of that beauty and magnificence, and I hope that in some ways this painting has now inspired you to go out and create your own masterpieces. The techniques you've seen in this video are exactly the same ones that I use in all my backgrounds or my forest scenes such as this one. They've all been done in exactly the same way. Backgrounds are such important things. They are the stage upon which your main subject can shine. The foliage here in a previous painting was done in exactly the same way. It's on a slightly larger scale compared to the subject, so there was perhaps more individual detail in the leaves, but it was done in much the same way. The background on the snow leopard also, a lot of soft blending with the palm of my hand, as was the case with this lion painting of mine. That brown was all smoothed with the flat of my hand, a deeper brown and then some orangey browns over the top. The same technique was used here. The orangey colour in the sky was just smoothed up with the flat of my hand over that very pale blue base layer. Here also is a Unison pastel base layer that's been finely manipulated and fine-tuned using Stabilo Carbothello pastel pencils. And the background here in this portrait was done with Unison pastels and then some Stabilo Carbothello pastel pencils skimmed over the top. Those greens were just skimmed in with the pastel pencil. The same thing here with this portrait of my son Bjorn. It was basically a brown Unison base, and then I used pastel pencils just to skim in some of those warmer, richer tones over the top. Maybe in the future I should do a DVD on portraiture as well. I paint a lot of different subjects, and one of my passions is the Apollo space program, and I think this one illustrates very well the importance of getting background tones in early on, so that you can then concentrate on finishing your foreground subjects. Nowhere is it more difficult than here, doing a jet black background in that sky right next to a pure white astronaut's spacesuit. That's about as difficult as it gets with pastel, and you have to be very, very careful with your edges, as I explained earlier. But I'll leave you for now with this painting, a recent painting called Where Tigers Pray. Take a look at the background here and realise that all the techniques I've shown you were the ones that I used in this painting as well. Lots of blending and then pencil work over the top of the base layer to create those trees. Lots of subtle colour work went in, shading with the Stabilo Carbothello pencils. And notice, if you will, how I've thrown the background back in order to bring the tiger sharply into focus. This was achieved by skimming over those lighter colours, exactly as I did in the cliffs in the painting that I demonstrated for you. Well, I really hope that this DVD set has been helpful to you, and good luck with your art. Thank you.